Greetings! My name is Dave Bianchi, and I'm a web manager here in Santa Clarita and a longtime member of the Santa Clarita WordPress meetup group. This is the 1 p.m. talk with Josh Pollock in the Colossus track. Josh is a JavaScript and PHP developer from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He is a lead web engineer at 10up and formerly was a plugin developer at Saturday Drive, Caldera WP, and Pods. He's a super nerd for ecology, dogs, growing plants, sci-fi, outdoor exercise, and trustless computing systems. Today, Josh will be presenting Getting Started with JavaScript Testing for WordPress. Please feel free to add your questions to the YouTube chat feed, and we'll answer those at the end. And now, a warm virtual welcome for Josh.
My name is Josh Pollock, and this is Getting Started with JavaScript Testing for WordPress. You're going to want to download the slides for this because there's a lot of code and there's links to complete plugins and application that you can use as start points for your tested-driven JavaScript development in WordPress. Again, my name is Josh Pollock. I've been doing PHP and JavaScript development for about 8 years, starting with WordPress, and testing's been a huge part of what I do as I've scaled, become more of an advanced developer, and I do believe these are basic skills that they're not that much different than writing any other type of code. The setup used to be such a pain when I got started, especially with JavaScript. It's gotten so easy, and I want to give you the start point where you can start writing some tests and feel better about your code working, feel better about the way that JavaScript development is changing in WordPress. So if you have any questions, you can find me online at Josh412 or find me in WordPress Slack. Again, download those slides. In here, there's going to be example code for part 1, which is a React app, and example code for part 2 is a complete WordPress plugin you can download, and you get the slides source on GitHub as well. So if you see a bug or a typo in my code, send in a pull request. Want me to cover something else next time I give this talk? Pull request. We're going to be covering different types of tests. Then we're going to be zooming in on unit and integration testing for React apps, showing how to apply that to Gutenberg blocks and how to set up our Gutenberg blocks so that way they're testable. Why are we doing this again is important. Our goal here is to have a way to type yarn test or npm run test and check all of the assumptions in our code. I think my code works. I think when I fix something, I didn't break something else. I want to double check that assumption using automated testing. There's a lot of different types of tests, and they all answer different questions. None of them say code works, but they can tell us things about our code. So unit tests tell us, does our component work in isolation? A React component, or think about it as one function in our PHP or JavaScript code. Does that work correctly? And then, more importantly, can I integrate these components together? If I have two components that are supposed to work together, do they? Because them working in isolations only tells me they might work together, but I have to have an integration test to test how they work together. Outside of the scope of this talk is acceptance testing, end-to-end testing. Everything we're going to be doing in this talk is going to be not using a real browser, not using WordPress backend at all, and making some assumptions that those things work. But you would want to layer on top of this some browser automation tests that click and make sure your block can be inserted. You type things in the block, things like that. But those are harder to set up, more complex to run, so you want to have lots of integration and unit tests before you get there. So let's look at the example code for part 1. This is a React app. And what we want to think about is how React works. Because we're going to be testing, does it work? So React, we have like some JSX normally. But really what it's telling us is, compiling to is react.createElement. So we like make a list this way, and it creates this representation, object representation of the state at any given point. When you click this, it recap renders. We have another one of these state trees. You run a fetch after it loads, it re-renders, you have another state tree like this, or another object representation of your application. That's what React does. It doesn't make HTML. React DOM makes HTML, renders it to the document object model in the browser, the render method, or just creates a string for server-side rendering with render to string. This isn't the only type of render. React Native works with native apps, and there's some other ones, but there's a whole class of test renderers. These are good for representing the data in a way that you can run assertions on. They're good for what we're doing. That's about it. So React Test Renderer does basic tests and snapshots, whereas the other two that I like, Enzyme and React Testing Library, which we'll be looking at more today, also React Test Renderer, but Enzyme and React Testing Library use JS DOM, so it's a virtual fake version of the document API in the browser, so we can use that. It's just more useful to us when doing testing. You'll see that. Without that, we can't do like change events or things like that. So you have this whole test suite. You have something like Jest, or in PHP, PHP unit that runs the test. You have the test renderer, which we've looked at. You've got the assertions. And again, these all get rolled in with your compiler, your build scripts, with React scripts. Zero config tool for WordPress development is WordPress scripts. We'll look at both today. You want to create a React app. Again, Create React App is a super cool tool that gives us everything set up with React scripts for testing and building. So we can just go ahead and create the app and then run our tests. There's one test included right away in a React app. And with this doesn't even use a test renderer. It just renders the app to an element, makes sure it doesn't crash. So this is a great example of an acceptance test. The whole system works, or it doesn't. You want to get more granular, that's why we have unit tests. We want to say, do our components work together as a unit test? Do they work just one by itself in isolation, and then together in integration tests, and then that third layer of the whole system together. So let's look at this app that we're going to build real quick. It's going to have display a value. It's going to show a value. So this is sort of like a profile editor. You would have like first name and then a section of the page that displays that. Let's jump into code real quick here. Those are blocks. This is my app. I have it. We're going to have one component that edits the value, one that displays the value, and state is above it. So that means that we can test these components in isolation without worrying about state, and then we can test this app function together to make sure that the when we change one, that's the other. So we can unit test our this component here, and we can unit test this group of elements that form an editor. Okay, so let's jump back into the browser. We want to make sure, does that component that displays the value show the right value? Can we change it, and do they work together? We can lay out our test files in two different ways. One is we have this function test, where we describe the test, and then we have a callback for it. And then the other one is where we group them. We say describe whatever component we're doing. It has the supplied value. I like this style. It passes string to unchanged when changed. Describes what's happening. Let's look at a test with test render. We're just testing this very basic component. It's a link to the docs. So we're unit testing React components here. This snapshot testing, what it does is, let's start by looking at the results of one of my snapshots. It commits a JSON representation, so a little bit of JSON, a little bit of HTML, to the DOM, depending on which one you're using. And so this is the rendered result. And if any of this changes, if I ask somebody to make a change that says add another class to the input, that's going to fail the test out. And so let's look at what the snapshot test looks like here to generate this. This is another snapshot test. This is the one specifically for what we're doing today. We're using test renderer, React test renderer. We're importing our component. We're saying to match snapshot. This is an example with this test renderer, which is going to show us this. And so I have this, everything passing, but what I want to show you here is that if I make a change here and I say, just change this class, and then my tests are going to run again, this failed. Why? Well, that failed because of other assumptions. But here you can see that it's saying I was expecting to have this from last run, and now I'm getting this. And maybe I commit to that change. Maybe I go ahead and accept this snapshot, and then the person doing the pull request goes, oh yeah, that was the class that was supposed to be added there. So that's what I like about this. It forces you to commit to the change. And then I can see that my test passed now. So let's go back to the browser here. This is what it looks like with React Test Renderer again. We just do something that looks very much like how we use it, and we're just in our application. Everything else, let's use React Testing Library, because it can do that, and it can also do these kind of what happens when the value of the, when we call these onChange functions. When we try and change the value, do we get this, and do we get the right values applied to our function? So in our app, as we saw, we were using setState for managing, useState, sorry, for managing state, but in our test, we're going to use just.fn instead. Just.fn is a mock function, and we're able to use fire event, which comes from React Testing Library, to fire an event on an element, give it a new value, and expect this mock function to have been called one time. Let's look in here a little bit. This is render from testing library. This is our edit component again. And these are these tests filled out. We're getting this fire event from testing library, and we're going to call a change. I could have typed .click for a button. You'll see that render returns all types of these queries back from here. So I could have used get by alt text, get by label text, just different ways to select the input. So I used the label text to find it, and I changed the value, and then a very similar test here where same setup. I'm using just a different query to show the different values, but they were that you can get back here, and I'm changing it to new value, and then I'm asserting that it's been called with new value. So I'm just testing that the change function works, and that it passes a string, not an object. Each test tests one thing. And I can also do snapshot testing with React Testing Library. It's actually a little simpler, the syntax. Just check this to match snapshot, and it kind of works magically underneath. And then do the two components work as expected? This I'm using a very different style of selectors. Container, which is returned here, you can think about that as the window API. So I can do like document.query selector or document.get by element ID in the browser. So here I do container.query selector. And I'm finding by value, I'm checking that it starts out as the default value. Then after I change it, does it display the correct one? So before, I was doing more unit tests where I was just checking that the component can call my onChange function. So I used the mock. This time I want to know, after I call the onChange function, does it update over there? So what I'm doing is I'm testing just like the user would. If we get a full screen here, I have the app running. I'm testing this. I'm testing what I see here, this I see as testing as functioning correctly. I'm just making sure in my code that that new value shows up. I'm also going to include in this example test, though it's a whole other talk and part of this WordCamp as well, accessibility testing. DQ makes an excellent browser extension. You can run it in your React code. Just remember, this tells you if you have errors related to accessibility. It does not tell you that your code is accessible. But it's similar to that first test that we saw. We render the HTML to a string using React DOM, and then we just check that HTML for accessibility issues. And you could do this with any function that renders a string of HTML this way. So you could capture the output of your page and run it that way. But what we were able to do there is build that app that displays a value and has input to change the value, and then we were able to prove that it does that with the unit tests. The unit test of the edit callback, the edit function, that it gives us the new value, and then we're able to prove that with this integration test that shows that when you change one, it updates the other. That's going to be very similar to what we're doing in a Gutenberg block. So if you have the slides, go ahead and click there. This is a plugin. Both of the example code repos are on GitHub, and I set them up as templates. So you can use them to start a WordPress plugin. Just make your own. It's got local development, that kind of stuff in there. Let's go back here and switch to the talk. Oops, there we are. Let's go through this. It's still React. It is a different way of using React, but we're going to use React testing library in our plugin instead of using WordPress script. Instead of using React scripts, we're going to use @WordPress scripts. We're going to have we're going to use something that takes a block that uses the editor to either display this value or to show like an inline type component, and it's based on the block tutorial in the handbook. We're just going to make some slight changes. Last time we used React scripts to set up your for testing. This time we're going to use WordPress scripts. This is a zero config build tool for WordPress plugins with blocks or any other React code. We have compiler, linter, test runner, the end-to-end test, and the local development. You also need @WordPress/env. Excuse me. Very complete. No need to worry about setting up Webpack and Babel and Jest in your code. You just yarn add WordPress scripts and then go in and copy some stuff into package.json. You're good to go. So don't let learning how to set this stuff up stop you from getting started. The good people in the WordPress open source project have provided for you, and there's all sorts of zero config test runners and everything out there for whatever framework you're using. So with WordPress scripts, we're still using Jest, just like before. I like to structure my blocks in a way where I have one file that imports the edit component, imports the save component. That way we can reuse them, for example, in tests, for example, in other screens. This is what it looks like basically in the tutorial using API v2, where everything comes from block.json, and then we just apply these components. But I do like to put them in separate files. This is my edit file we saw before. This is a slightly different than the block editor tutorial. Two things. One, because my spec is a little bit differently, I want to show two different things based on this is selected. Text input or just the value. Other thing is, this is a WordPress specific implementation. I don't want to test the framework. I want to test my code. So that's why I'm putting editor here. Like, this could go here, but I'm using a separate export for it, and I'm decoupling it from the use block props hook. I could mock that. I just kind of don't feel like it, given that that's not what I'm testing. Instead, I want to test, does it match the snapshot when it's not selected? When it is selected, does it call the onChange function? It does pass that updated value to the onChange callback. So our snapshot tests, just like before, I'm just testing two different types of props. That way I get both states. So one of the things about snapshot testing is it's only as good as the input that you provide. So if you have a couple different ways that your component might look, depending on some conditional logic inside of it, make sure you make a snapshot for each one of those. Then we're going to do very similar tests again, where we do we render the editor component, we do a change event, and this was get by display value, so I have a predictable input here. I'm going to make sure it gets called one time, and it gets called with the sparkling water. That's my updated value. And again, I'm using unchanged, the just.fn. It's this built-in mock, so I don't have to assemble my own mocks. It has these helpful assertions attached to it. This is my save callback, and in this save callback, what I have is the just showing like the value of the one attribute that I'm saving. And I don't think that's worth saving, writing a test for that, because you don't want to test the framework. And this is the kind of thing that's better to rely on acceptance testing or manual QA for. Sometimes you just need to see how everything works together. So let's go back in and look at that block. I kind of went past it pretty quickly. I want to use the rest of my time to show similar concepts between the two example codes. So this is the block plugin. Let's look at this whole thing now that we've gone over it. I wish my package.json was prettier. We can... Okay, let's look at more of this code here for the two different tests that we're doing, the plugin and the application. So let's look at just working backwards. Let's start with the plugin here. If you look in the package.json, I'm install all of the different things that we use from WordPress, the different packages, and then because I'm using WordPress scripts, it will extract React, it will extract WordPress block editor, and you can see what it compiles here. It creates this PHP file that tells me I need WP blocks, I need WP components. Those are my dependencies. And then when I enqueue it, I load that file, build/blocks/assets.php, and I use that for register script, and then I go ahead and register block type. There's no other PHP in there, which is cool. And then, as I showed, this is my using my block.json here, and then I'm adding my edit and save component to that. And these here are two components where I just have this, this conditional logic here. And so I want to go in here and I want to test that that it looks a certain way when isSelected is true or isSelected and false. And that gives me these two components here. Saved, that again, if I make any change to, it will fail out my tests. And I put them together that way. Let's back up now with our remaining time that we have to look at how that is in a React app itself. This is the app from before. You're going to notice that these are very similar components to what we were looking at in the WordPress block. Instead of using, I could have just imported WordPress components, text control right here, but I made my own, make it a little bit more obvious. But you see how I've selected, handled, I've structured this component so it takes a function, it takes a value. I, inside of here, deal with moving from an event object to just the update value. And then I'm able to test that. Again, I have a snapshot, but I also do the change here. So if I were to accidentally wire it directly like this, I get all these errors. The component just can't make sense of that. But the real one that I'm concerned with was this to be have been called with new value. Instead, I get this object, event object, and I realize, oh, shoot, I meant to pass this. I run that again. Not only do I not get errors, I don't get that warning. And if I go in here and I say editor wrap, I get a snapshot fail where it says, I was expecting some class and I got this instead, and then I either have to commit to that, just type U, and you see this changed from 4 to 5 because something else had changed, and right here in my git commit that somebody would, I or somebody else would have to commit to, we would see this snapshot had been changed. So these are two, one React app, one WordPress plugin that you can get to from the slides if you download them here at joshpress.net/slides/js-testing. I hope that you will use those as the start point for plugins or apps that you want to write tests for. It's GPL, obviously, so spirit of WordPress, spirit of open source. Please borrow and share with your neighbors. Thank you so much for watching my talk. If you have questions, please find me. It's awesome to be a part of a WordCamp, and I really look forward to doing this again in person soon. Thank you.
Hi, Josh. Welcome back.
Hello again.
Hi. So we're doing the Q&A, and we have a question ready to go. Josh, do you have any book recommendations to learn React? I've been putting it off for years.
Book recommendations, not sure. I can give you some reading stuff that I recommend. The React documentation is really good, and you can go through there and get the basics. Dave Sedia, I'll put this in a tweet if you follow me at Josh412. Just reply to my one about this talk. Has a like email course that comes in like 5 parts. It's free and it shows you little app things to build. I recommend that. And then there's also a course called Epic React that I know a lot of people have learned from. If you're into that, I mean, I'm somebody who likes to like do, run, create React app or create a new WordPress plugin around that way, all new things. Oh, that's my dog. 1 second. Sorry, I'm back. My dog been quiet this whole time. Whoa, I wasn't on the microphone. Anyway, what was I saying? Epic React's a good one, but I really recommend like run, create React app, or use something like StackBlitz to get you started with a React app and just try it. Go through the docs and try and build things. And the good thing about WordPress is that a WordPress block can be a little simple thing inside of this really big system that you can learn over time. So I think building a WordPress block using the tutorial and the handbook is another great way to get started with React.
There's another question. Do you have some recommendations on best practices for testing our code?
Sure. I mean, I think that not getting too hung up on some of the things like, is it a unit test? Am I testing too many assertions in there? One of the too many things in one test. The thing that I look for is when I run the code in the browser and it doesn't work the way I thought it would, why? And then I write a test about that. Like, what test could I have had that would have prevented me from looking at the browser and going, oh, I made a mistake there, or seeing an error from a user? So I just think, like, what are the tests that if I had it, I wouldn't be here debugging this issue? And that's my best practice for figuring out what to write a test about.
What sort of IDEs would you recommend for people just learning to code in React?
VS Code is great. It's free, and it has tons of great extensions. And if you just install, like, if you just search the extensions for React and JavaScript, it'll fill out all of your code completes and syntax for JSX and that kind of stuff, and have, like, I use an extension where I can type 2 or 3 letters and it auto completes out a full React component. Like, the VS Code ecosystem is really great for that kind of stuff. So I really recommend VS Code. I do also like WebStorm and PHP Storm as IDEs. I just don't use them as much because VS Code.
And are there any additional questions? I'm not seeing anything else. Any other points that you would like to make, Josh?
No, I mean, I really encourage everybody to try some tests as they write code. It's a whole shift if you've never done it. And I would encourage people to try it out with JavaScript first, if you've never done it in WordPress, just because it's easier. There's nothing as good as Create React App or WordPress scripts for PHP yet. And so I would say get used to the idea of testing with your JavaScript, with your React code. It's the easiest place to do it in your WordPress development. And then from there, think about PHP testing, think about automated browser testing. But I would definitely say get started with just like a Gutenberg block or a React app to get comfortable with the testing tools.
I think that about covers it then. Unless there's any other last minute questions. All right then. Thank everyone for attending the session with Josh. You can continue this conversation on the Slack General channel or through Twitter. What is your Twitter handle again, Josh?
Yeah, I'm at Josh412.
Okay.
And that was a great question about like books and other courses. So I'll start a little Twitter thread about it and I'll drop the link in the Slack.
And don't forget to attend the next talk, a review of custom fields libraries, ACF, CMB2, and Metabox with Topher De Rosa at 2 p.m. here on the same channel. See everyone after the break.